Look, when the Black Keys canceled their arena tour, that's a surprise. But when Jennifer Lopez has to promise she's going to play the hits in order to sell tickets, or Bad Bunny has to cancel tour dates, maybe something is up. Today on the podcast, why aren't people going to concerts? I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. This is Commotion. All right, I'm not sure if you got a chance to listen to yesterday's podcast, but on that show, we looked at movies and why audiences just aren't rushing out to theaters like they used to right now. So today we want to stick with kind of the same similar idea, but we are going to start with this. That is the Black Keys. That song is called Beautiful People Stay High. You hear that song and you go, oh, you know what I want to do is hear that song in a giant arena. I want to hear this song in a giant stadium. It's built for that kind of space. It's off their latest album, Ohio Players. It's a record that they seemed really excited to play live on this giant arena tour this September. But then all of that changed just a few days ago. The band completely scrapped all 31 dates without any warning. And then they said they plan to rebook the tour in, let's just say, more intimate venues. It seems like the low and slow ticket sales were behind that decision. And here's the thing. The Black Keys are not the only big act to sort of change up their plans for a tour. So today on the podcast, we are going to look at what's going on. What's going on at live shows and ask, where are the fans? Jem Aswad and Maura Johnston are here. Jem, Maura, welcome to the show.
Hey,
Hi.
what's up?
Listen, I'm excited that you guys are doing this. I'm stressed about it because I would like to go to as many shows as possible, but this doesn't bode well. So, Maura, I'll start with you. What was your reaction when you heard the Black Keys scrap the entire tour?
I actually was not too surprised.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of wondered if it was a little bit of a harbinger of things to come. This is like an anecdote, but last month I reviewed Olivia Rodrigo's show at TD Garden, which is where the Celtics play and where the Bruins play. So it's, a big hockey arena. It's the biggest arena in the city.
Yeah. And
I wound up running into some of the vendors afterwards while I was waiting out the post-show traffic. And they told me, they were like, this year is unlike any other for concerts. They said there are more shows at TD Garden this year than ever in their careers. And some of them have been there like 10, 15 years. And, it's interesting when you look at the lineups because like one of the shows that's coming up, it's like Casey Musgraves. I love Casey Musgraves. I think her new record is beautiful. Yeah. But, is she an act that can draw like 5-figure crowds in multiple cities?
Are 20,000 people going to turn out to see Casey Musgraves?
Right,
yeah.
right. I mean, like she's great, but it's just interesting if you look at these events. I think I counted and there were like 44 concerts at TD Garden between now and the end of the year. And the end of the year is going to be Aerosmith because they're, wrapping up and they're from Boston.
Yeah.
But that's a lot. That's a lot for a half year.
Yeah.
At an arena in a city that also has, a football stadium, baseball stadium, another arena that's a little smaller, and then 2 brand new venues of 3,500 plus that just opened in the last couple of years, and some amphitheaters as well.
So, Jen, when you kind of like look at this moment, the idea that the Black Keys would cancel this tour, in your years of covering the music industry, how often do you see a band? I would describe the Black Keys as a pretty popular band. How often do you see a popular band like them scrap an entire, tour for reasons that are not like health issues?
I mean, it's usually a big deal when that does happen.
Yeah.
Having said that, the Black Keys are, I'm sorry, past their commercial prime. Okay, I'm not talking about.
He's ready to call it.
Yeah. And they, I mean, it's like we looked at that tour because whenever an artist announces a tour, we look at the dates. Where are they playing? How ambitious are they? Yeah. We were like, Madison Square Garden, are you kidding? It was like, it's not 2009. They probably would have sold it out then, but not today. That was 15 years ago. And, you're no longer hearing all these commercials that sound like the Black Keys anymore. So, that was a fair statement. J-Lo has been out of music for quite some time. Her film career is doing great. Her entrepreneuring career is doing great. But music was almost like an afterthought. And at around the same time, both she and Justin Timberlake came thundering back with these new albums that nobody cared about. Mm-hmm. Now, Timberlake's tour is doing great because he's the best pop singer performer you will see out there today.
He's really fun to see live. Yeah.
Yeah, he and Harry Styles, are probably the two peaks. And Justin's a much better dancer. So, I mean, his tour is doing great. Olivia's tour is doing great.
Sure.
Billie Eilish's tour is doing great. It's really kind of case by case. People are getting overly ambitious, and that's where we're seeing things like this tour cancel it. I mean, it's really more of a postponement, but it's a cancellation in that they're just like, okay, we can't fill any of these venues.
Well, it's really a statement of saying we overshot. It's the problem that you just said, Jem, the idea of ambition. We overshot what we wanted to do, and it turns out we actually can't quite do that, so let's do something else. But I'm glad that you brought up J-Lo, Jem, because I want to ask you this about J-Lo, Maura. I want to ask you about the fact that, like Jem said, she just dropped this album, This Is Me Now. People were kind of like, I don't know about this. And it didn't really make a particularly significant splash. It was gone, 4 days after it came out. She sort of billed the tour as like a This Is Me Now tour. And then very quickly she sort of had to like rebrand and called it This Is Me Live Greatest Hits. When someone like Jennifer Lopez is struggling to sell tickets, is that an emergency? Is that like a ring the alarm kind of moment, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, the Jennifer Lopez thing is its own unique thing because, she had this whole like multimedia extravaganza, the film with Fat Joe as her therapist, and I watched it. It's a wild ride if you ever
Post Malone is in it for no reason.
100%. Post Malone, Kim Petras, Jane Fonda,
and
like
that's right.
yeah. And there was that, and then there was the documentary, and then there was the album, and I feel like she really thought that people were going to be invested in her as a celebrity. And I feel like her struggles are not only because like pop is very young, pop is aggressively young these days, but also because, I think that there's kind of a growing dissatisfaction with the sort of celebrity that Jennifer Lopez represents and has represented since her emergence in the 90s. And I think that that's part of it too, is like that whole package was so full of excess, and the record's not bad. The record's fine. But again, it's like people, if they're going to lay out as much money as they need to lay out for a show at an arena, they want to have some known quantities there.
I'm really interested in that idea, the idea that pop is particularly having a young moment right now. When you say that, you mean names like Olivia Rodrigo, but like who else are you talking about? Billie
Eilish.
Yeah.
And even artists like, Gracie Abrams,
Yes.
like all the people that sort of Taylor Swift is bringing along with her on the Eras tour.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, I want you guys to have a listen to this.
Young dealer selling, is you like that? Kicking doors, kicking in doors, is you like that? Young throw, selling lows, is you like that? All 24, you won't go, is you like that?
Come on, that is two of the biggest names in hip hop right now. Feature Metro Boomin. This is the #1 single. This is Like That from the recent #1 album, We Don't Trust You. Jem, look, if you look at the Ticketmaster page right now, you will see a lot of unsold seats to this tour. And these guys are all over the charts. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, because this happens all the time. The fact that somebody has a hit single, especially in this era of TikTok hits, doesn't mean people are going to pay to see this artist. Okay, some of the biggest artists on TikTok right now, you listen to their albums, they can barely sustain an album. Some of them can.
I don't think a feature Metro Boomin is TikTok artists, honestly. I mean, like they've been around for a minute,
Well, absolutely, but Future is not the world's. Future's a good performer. Metro Boomin is an unknown quantity as a producer, as a performer. He is a producer, okay? So this is basically a Future tour. He's got some hits under his belt. He's got, a great legacy of hip-hop hits, but especially in the rap world, you've got to be a superstar to draw in arenas, and you've got to show that you can put on a big, a really, really big performance. Kendrick Lamar's tours. He did one in 2017, 2018, and he came back again in 2022 after his Mr. Morale album. And the production values were drastically higher, and he played arenas, and he did great. So you need to promise that sort of thing, and we're not seeing those promises.
Yeah, there's more. I always have this in my mind, temptation to connect two things, to connect high streaming numbers with, high number of tickets sold. But over and over again, we seem to be getting this evidence of like, no, people will stream your music, but they will not turn up to sort of see you live. Do you see those ideas as particularly linked, or are you kind of like, no, streaming doesn't really mean that people are going to be that excited for your show?
Yeah, I mean, streaming is it's a low commitment, endeavor. Like it's $9.99, $14.99 a month.
Yeah.
Whereas, and you can put the song on, you can put whatever song you want to hear on and then go to the next thing.
Yeah.
Whereas with a show, it's like, okay, even before the fees that get added on to everything, tickets are expensive. And people, especially now, I think that there's a lot of talk about personal economics and what do you save money for when the costs of living has gone up a lot lately, so people are being more judicious about their spending, and they'll save their money for like the shows that are big deals, whether it's the Eras tour in Amsterdam or the Grateful Dead show here in Las Vegas, or wherever. And I think that a lot of artists, like Jem said, like need to bring up their production values and make their shows events.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean,
Jem.
something I would say to that, something that has really changed in the age of streaming, those of us who are old enough to remember buying CDs and buying records, note I'm saying records, not vinyl, that was an investment, okay? It's an investment on every level. You are investing in this artist. You believe in this artist. You're putting your money down. You're like maybe walking home with the album under your arm so everybody can see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, that's something that you see in a different way now, okay? Because people are flocking to Justin Timberlake's concerts or Madonna's hits tour, who could not care less about their last 3 albums.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what that artist meant to them at the time. So, like, you're not good. If there's a one-hit wonder, with a big streaming hit, that is not the same level of investment of an artist that you grew up with or an artist that you followed for 3 or 4 albums. Even if you're not paying attention to the new one, it's like the Stones tour is doing great, and nobody has cared about a Rolling Stones album for 40 years. So, I mean, it's really that there are different levels of investment here, but what touring taps into is that old school thing where it's almost in a sense of allegiance, like you feel like you're putting something on the line for this artist.
Yeah. No, listen, I remember, when I went to Sunrise Records, man, it was like after having worked several hours of minimum wage in order to be able to afford this one album. The investment certainly was different than just being able to stream the song. Maura, we should say, like yesterday on this podcast, we talked about why people just aren't going out to see movies as much anymore. Obviously, the film concert industries are very different, but do you see a connection between those two worlds?
Absolutely. I feel like music is sort of a leading indicator for digital age media consumption. I think I've said this on this show before, so apologies for repeating myself. But because it's so atomized and bite-sized, and because there's so much more, like, I remember during the peak of peak TV, people were like, 500 shows in a year? What? And it's like that many albums come out like every month, and that doesn't even count singles. But, I think also there's something to be said about like just the media landscape in general. Like I remember back in 2016 when Kanye did his Life of Pablo tour. Yeah. I was in an Uber and I was talking to the driver, and he's like, yeah, Kanye West is my favorite artist. And I was like, oh, like, did you go see him at TD Garden last month? And the guy was like, he was here? Like, I didn't know. And I feel like, the demise of like mass media. I mean, obviously I have a dog in this fight as a writer for the Boston Globe, but like, I think that the demise of like this place where you can go to find out what's going on, without like, having to like sign up for a fan club or a mailing list or something, is really kind of killing the way in which people who aren't as plugged in get information. And I feel like, there was a great piece by Tom Skoka, the writer, about the Furiosa Garfield thing. And he was like, I didn't know that the Garfield movie was a new movie. I thought it was a repertory showing of the Bill Murray one, And I feel like that, and that was a major event, obviously. Yeah. But I feel like there's this kind of just disintegration of these promotional outlets and the way in which everybody consumes media now, which is very single serving. You don't have your eye kind of fall on a page and be like, oh, that looks interesting, I'll check it out. So it's hitting music, but I think it's starting to hit, the other cultural industries that maybe have like bigger hits as well.
Well, I was going to say that exact
Yeah, I mean-
analogy came up yesterday when we were talking about movies, because one person talked about The Fall Guy and how The Fall Guy is already out of theaters, but you talked to several people who knew the television show that the movie's based on, who would have loved to see this thing, and they never heard of it. They never even heard that movie's coming out. So the idea that the promotional channels are just kind of going to the wrong places, that really does resonate. Jem, I got literally 30 seconds. We were sort of talking about how the fact that the majority of the big tours in North America were put on by Live Nation, which also owns Ticketmaster. Last year, they put these record revenues of nearly $23 billion. Now they got to prove in a court of law that they don't have a monopoly over live concerts. In 30 seconds or so, do you think this might be, a good sign for music fans?
30 seconds, you're hilarious. Oh my God. We kept the Bible.
If you can.
Okay, no, the challenge here is, the main question is, will it make things better for consumers?
Yeah.
Okay. Is Live Nation a monopoly? Arguably, by United States law, it certainly looks like one. Okay. They have been super aggressive. I mean, if we were in business school, I'd be saying vertical integration, that's how it's done, Sure. But they're overstepping quite a bit. But again, is it going to make things better for fans? I don't think it will if they're broken up. It may make them worse in the short term because it could drive prices up. There will be chaos. There are, synergies in place that we're all very used to. And the other question is, could anyone be doing a better job than Ticketmaster? I see no evidence that anyone could. There are promising models like the relatively new ticketing company Dice.
Yeah.
Rather than a resell market, if you don't want your ticket anymore, they buy it back and they resell it at face value, like an ordinary retail item. Go figure. And,
Right.
all the other ticketing companies are just like, oh, no, we couldn't possibly do that. It's impossible. They don't want it to cut into their profits on the secondary market. So I hope that sort of recaps it in 37 seconds.
Yeah, you did it in about a minute, but that's all right, because that was a perfect answer. And also, it makes me go, I think there's another hour to be done on this conversation, but we got to leave it there. Yeah. Jem, Maura, I appreciate your time and your energy and your attention. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Jem Aswad is the executive music director for Variety in New York City, and Maura Johnston is a freelance music journalist based in Boston. Today, she was in Vegas. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Listen, the Cannes Film Festival already wrapped up, but I couldn't get the excitement about this one movie out of my head. It is a Canadian movie. It's called Universal Language. It's directed by Matthew Rankin. Look, Canadian filmmakers are not strangers to Cannes at all, but we haven't seen this much excitement for Canadian film there in a while. Universal Language is basically a real-life take on Rankin returning to his hometown of Winnipeg, but his life begins to unravel with a bit of a twist. Film critic David Ehrlich is here. He's got a chance to see Universal Language when he was at Cannes, and he wrote all about it. David, welcome to Commotion.
Hey, Elamin, happy to be here. I was hoping that we would also be able to talk about the Jennifer Lopez movie where Fat Joe plays her therapist. But if we have to talk about the Cannes Film Festival, I suppose I can do that too.
Forget it. We're not talking about Cannes anymore. We're returning. No, we're not going to do that. Listen, the excitement that I saw in people's feeds about Universal Language was quite amazing. What do you make of all the buzz that the movie got?
Yeah, I mean, buzz is a really hard thing to track at a place like Cannes because there are so many movies, they all suck the air out of the room when they premiere, and then they don't repeat. So one day everyone's talking about Francis Ford Coppola's film, and then the next day people are talking about Furiosa. And then, if you're talking about Canadian filmmakers, David Cronenberg was there with a new movie that I found very moving, but I think it's going to be a tough sell.
Okay.
But, all of these big films premiered, but Matthew Rankin's film, Universal Language, which premiered at the very start of the festival, never seemed to go away. Every time you talk to people about, about what they had loved at the festival, which is basically the only conversation that people have there for 2 weeks, they would return to Universal Language time and time and time again. And so you sort of anecdotally got the sense that this movie was really working for everyone who had been fortunate enough to see it. Yeah. And since it actually has distribution, at least in the United States, and I would hope for Canada as well, considering that his last movie was nominated for one of your Best Picture nominees, 20th Century, that it'll actually see the light of day before too long.
Do you want to take on the not easy task of telling people what Universal Language is about? Because it's not a conventional movie, let's say.
Yeah, this will hopefully be the hardest thing I have to do today. The movie is billed as an hallucinatory autobiography. It is essentially like a mind palace of all the things about movies that Matthew Rankin loves.
Yeah.
This is a white Canadian Winnipegger who fell in love with movies through the Iranian meta-realist films that were made by people like Abbas Kiarostami and Jafar Panahi in the 80s and the 90s. And that became the language for him that movies were. He actually traveled to Iran in the hopes of finding these filmmakers and learning from them.
Wow.
And he failed to do that. It's a tall task, but he was able to sort of take that enthusiasm with him back to Canada, as you see in this movie. And what he's done is created an alternate universe Winnipeg, where the only language, well, actually not, the main language spoken is Farsi, and most of the cast is Iranian. And it's basically mining the comedy of overlaying that world and all of Iranian culture over the snowiest, most blustery winter that Winnipeg has ever seen, and sort of mining not necessarily the culture clash, because there is no sort of butt of the joke. If anything, it's very self-effacing about Winnipeg. But it's just looking at what this sort of cultural swirl is like. And I think, what he's trying to do, and I can get to the plot such as it is, which starts with, it's about a bunch of little kids, as those Iranian films often were. One of them shows up late to school because a turkey gobbled up his glasses and ran away. And not just any turkey, but the second place or two-time winning turkey at a turkey beauty contest. It's a very famous turkey who we later see bust into Winnipeg with his own ticket. Then these other kids find 500 rial thawed or buried, frozen in a block of ice, which is something that happened to Matthew Rankin's own grandmother. So he's incorporating his own story into what on the surface seems it's like an Iranian drama. And the story is really driven by these two kids looking for a way to thaw out the money so that they can help pay for their friends' new glasses. And things sort of spiral out from there. And then the last thing I'll say about the plot is that there's this other subplot involving a character named Matthew, who's played by Matthew Rankin, who quits his very menial job in the Quebec government and returns to Winnipeg, speaks fluent Farsi, and is looking for his mother on her birthday. And the film, which is always very wry and funny in a way not dissimilar from something like a Guy Maddin movie, becomes increasingly poignant as his search for his mother leads to a sort of multicultural, cross-cultural confluence and sense of transference that is a lot more pronounced than realism would ever allow it to be.
First of all, for the hardest thing I got to do today, you did a splendid job. That was incredible. But also, I do think like there's something really lovely, but also really ambitious about a project like this one. But the idea of like, hey, it's going to be an autobiography, but also a hallucination at that. It's going to pull together elements from Winnipeg and Montreal and also Iran. It's going to be a biography of an autobiography of a white film director, but also largely the movie is going to be in Farsi. I think if you just tell people those pieces of information, they'll go, I don't know what you're talking about. I need to go watch a Marvel movie. In the sense like there's
Pull
an
collar a little bit. Sounds a little problematic potentially.
Exactly. There's an overwhelm, I think, in the amount of information that you receive. So has Matthew Rankin talked about the desire to maybe tell the story in Farsi? Has he said anything about why he made those choices?
Yeah, well, he hasn't, the movie just premiered. He hasn't spoken at length about it, but I think watching the film, and again, knowing the premise and sitting down for it, there are all sorts of places where something like this could go wrong. And I think where it starts to go right is just the sincerity that he brought to bear on the project. I mean, he co-wrote it with two Iranian writers who also appear in the film. But at no point is Iranian culture, or really any other culture aside from maybe Winnipeg's, the butt of the joke. The people aren't. It is all just done to celebrate sort of the boundarylessness of cinema. And I think a lot of it is a reaction to the tribalism and the borders and the walled off world that we live in now, despite the fact that media is traveling internationally more than ever. I mean, people are retreating to their bases and their identity politics at a time when people are reading finally the subtitles. We have hits like Parasite and Squid Game. People are finally willing to engage. The masses are like never before with world cinema, television from all over the world. And I think Matthew Rankin is really fascinated by that disconnect. And so, he's looking at, movies for him have always been a gateway to the world.
I gotta pause. I unfortunately gotta cut it off there because we're just about out of time. But that makes me just want to see this movie desperately right now. But David Ehrlich, thank you so much for being on the show today, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
My name is Elamin. This show is called Commotion. I want to see that movie, but in the meantime, we gotta leave it there. Have a good day.